So you're HSBC, one of the biggest banks in the world. You are so big and powerful that if you were a country, you would be the 5th biggest world power, outranking the United Kingdom. See, the great thing about being a bank is that everyone needs banking services. Moms, dads, terrorists, drug traffickers, sketchy shell companies, everyone. The problem is countries don't like it when banks work with people they deem as criminals. So as a bank with the power of a country, you're presented with 2 very different paths on how to operate. Path number 1. You properly vet every client and refuse to let criminals use your bank, thus leaving money on the table. Or you can take path number 2. You happily work with terrorists, drug traffickers, illegal diamond dealers, and other sketchy characters because they are your biggest customers. They deposit giant sums of money, which you can then use to lend out, charge transaction fees on to make even more money. So HSBC, which path do you take?
American authorities discovered that the Sinaloa cartel moved $881 million through HSBC accounts.
Said HSBC had made a string of errors, including inadequate monitoring of money laundering and terrorist financing scenarios.
HSBC's compliance history, as examined today, is unacceptable.
As a drug cartel, you have a big issue on your hands. You're making loads of cash, billions upon billions of dollars. Now that may not sound like a problem at first, but cash is bulky. $1 billion weighs around 1,000 tons, and that's only if it's all in $100 bills. So you would need a giant place to store all that cash, security to protect it from thieves, security to make sure your own workers don't skim any of it, and it's kinda hard to make purchases in general with just cash. Like you can't buy anything online with just physical cash. You can't buy anything overseas without shipping a bunch of physical cash over there. It's just a mess. So the easiest route is to just deposit your blood money into a bank. The problem is most banks follow know your customer laws and don't let criminals deposit money. HSBC is not one of those banks.
When Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was operating the world's largest drug cartel out of Sinaloa, Mexico, he was doing most of his banking through Europe's largest bank, HSBC. American authorities discovered that the Sinaloa cartel moved $881 million through HSBC accounts as bank officials turned a blind eye to the illegality.
In 2002, HSBC acquired Batal Bank with the intention of building a bigger presence in Mexico. Batal Bank also just happened to be the Sinaloa cartel's financial institution of choice. El Chapo had enormous sums of money flowing into it, but I'm sure that had nothing to do with their decision to buy it. Anyways, HSBC had their own system of scoring how risky a bank was. The lower the score, the safer the bank is, and riskier banks are given a higher rating. Even though there are literally piles of evidence showing that Batal Bank was handling huge amounts of dirty cash from Mexican cartels, HSBC gave them the lowest possible risk rating. In other words, HSBC bought a bank filled to the brim with cartel money, gave them a low risk rating to make it look legit so they could collect fees and interests on the hundreds of thousands of dollars that rolled in daily from the cartel. Here's how HSBC and Mexican cartels would help each other. First, drug traffickers would take their dirty money to Mexico, where the HSBC branch would happily process the millions without question. Then HSBC Mexico would send the money off to a correspondent branch in the US, who would route the funds to the ultimate destination. All of this was possible because they knew the transactions wouldn't get flagged, and even if they were flagged, the money would still be sent through without further investigation. Once Mexican cartels realized how much easier HSBC made their lives, they went all out. To make the deposit process more efficient, cartel members even started bringing cash in boxes that were specifically made to fit through the HSBC teller windows. HSBC was building a reputation with cartel lords as the place to launder money, but bank officials completely ignored it because they were rolling in profits. But this couldn't go on forever without their crimes being noticed. Meet El Chino, a businessman in the drug trafficking scene. He ran a wholesale pharmaceutical company in Mexico called Unimed. Since Unimed dealt with pharmaceuticals, they were legally allowed to bring all different chemicals into Mexico, and many of these chemicals could be used by cartels to make their drugs. And thus, a criminal partnership between El Chino and El Chapo's cartel was born. Unfortunately, his pharma company failed to renew their license in 2005, which led to police raiding El Chino's home in Mexico City. That's where they found over $200 million piled up waist high. This led police to discovering that all this money was being deposited into HSBC. Then the whole image came together. Once investigators looked into HSBC more, they realized that it wasn't just El Chino who was taking advantage of HSBC's relaxed anti-laundering regulations. There were lots of people. El Chino was just the beginning. By 2010, the OCC, which monitors the US banking system, had heard enough. They issued a 31-page order detailing the money laundering that was happening at HSBC. This letter was meant to serve as a warning to HSBC, while also giving instructions on how to fix their problems. One of the things the bank was told to do was to go back through the backlog of around 17,000 suspicious activity alerts that they had spent years ignoring. This was a massive task for HSBC, so they started hiring a bunch of random people to fill in these compliance officer spots and go through the backlogs. The compliance officers found many transactions from people on the OFAC sanctions list, a list that outlines all the people and organizations that companies are not supposed to do business with, like terrorists and traffickers. Usually the names on the sanctions list are automatically prevented from making transactions. So why were they going through HSBC? Well, HSBC was using dots and dashes to conceal the name of anyone on the list. For example, if Kim Jong-un was trying to wire money through HSBC, HSBC would write his name like this, or like this. That way, it would bypass the automatic system and allow the transactions to go through. It's honestly kind of funny how brazen they were with this. Once this was uncovered, the United States knew it was time to take action against HSBC. Or at least that's what everyone thought was going to happen.
As part of its resolution of these charges, HSBC has agreed to forfeit $1.256 billion for a total recovery of over $1.9 billion.
After years of shady dealings, everything came to a head with HSBC in 2012. They were called to a hearing with the US Senate, where the Senate said most of the $7 billion in banknotes HSBC transferred from Mexico to the US came from drug dealing. They also stated that HSBC went out of its way to bypass the automated systems that block transactions with terrorists, drug lords, and countries on America's naughty list, like hiding $19.4 billion worth of transactions with Iran. By December 2012, US District Attorney Loretta Lynch announced that criminal charges have been filed against HSBC for laundering at least $881 million for El Chapo's cartel and other Mexican drug cartels. All this meant that justice was about to be served, right? Wrong. Immediately after announcing the charges, the DA explains that HSBC will receive a Deferred Prosecution Agreement, or DPA, which is kind of like putting a giant corporation on probation, a slap on the wrist. HSBC admitted to helping Mexican drug cartels funnel money, and the DPA required HSBC to pay a fine of $1.9 billion, the largest penalty of its kind that a bank had ever received. But in reality, $1.9 billion was equal to 5 weeks of the bank's profits. HSBC also needed to be watched by an independent monitor for the next 5 years. While the monitor was supposed to keep an eye on HSBC, they were also selected and paid for by the bank. Plus, monitors weren't law enforcement officials. They didn't have that much power, and HSBC knew this. The public was outraged. The decision confirmed what everyone already knew. The big banks are too big for jail. Quote, they aren't jailable, end quotes. Throughout pages of reports, the appointed monitor explained how HSBC was still providing financial services to suspicious people and organizations. By 2017, the 5-year monitor requirement came to an end, and it was announced that HSBC had met its obligations and no longer needed the monitor. HSBC just got off the hook for working with Mexican drug cartels without a single executive getting arrested. It's been a decade since HSBC was charged, so has enough time passed for HSBC to change their ways? Nope. In 2015, journalists from around the globe released a Swiss Leaks report about how HSBC was helping wealthy customers at their Swiss unit evade taxes.
Mr. Gulliver will get on a lot faster if you give a straight answer to a straight question. You agree with me it's caused reputational damage to the bank?
Yes.
Are you the appropriate person in those circumstances to remain as the Chief Executive Officer of HSBC?
I believe I am because my tax affairs are in order.
That scandal settled for 40 million euros, which equaled to 0.1% of their revenue for that year. More recently, HSBC was exposed by the FinCEN files in 2020, which were a collection of leaked US Treasury documents from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. The files reviewed HSBC's deep involvement with a Ponzi scheme called WMC777. It also showed that HSBC's compliance staff filed reports that lacked basic customer information on shell companies that processed almost $1.5 billion in transactions, turning a blind eye to a sketchy customer base. A classic HSBC move. In interviews with former HSBC compliance officers, they said that the bank's anti-money laundering program was a complete joke even during its probation period. HSBC started as a bank that connected Britain and China together in Hong Kong. Today, they've evolved into one of the most widespread financial institutions in the world, bigger than Britain itself, where on top of being too big to fail, they're also too big to jail.